Hello, everybody. It's Monday, June 8th, 2020. My name is Tony Bacigalupo. This is the weekly New York City's Q&A. And my goodness, we are in such a historic time. We have seen some incredible things happen this last week, some terrible things happen this past week. And there are all kinds of things that the people who join this group and this call can do to help enact greater positive change in their communities. And for that reason, I am focusing whatever I can on helping equip the people who are joining for this conversation to do whatever they can to do a better job of being community leaders in their area. I was so fortunate over the weekend to receive a message from Danielle Hines, who's joining us. She's our special guest today. She offered to make herself available to share her perspective, to answer questions. Danielle is the founder of a co-working space in Birmingham, Alabama that's opening soon. That is at the center of the 1960s civil rights movement. It's a historic monument. I can speak to it, but I'm sure she'll be able to speak to it more eloquently, so I'll let her speak about it. But Danielle is has an incredible amount of experience and talent to share, and she and I have worked together. I realized, Danielle, you first reached out to me about 2 years ago now, so it's been a ride. So I'm very grateful for that. So the way this is going to work is I'll actually why don't we let everybody else on the call just introduce themselves real quick, and then we don't need to go into questions right now. So just say like who you are, where you are, a little bit about like your space, and then Danielle, I'll interview you. I'll ask you a little bit about your story, your background, your where how you ended up where you are today, your perspective on what's happening now and where the opportunity is, and then and that will take a little bit of time, and then we'll open it up to Q&A with everybody here. So we good? All right. Thank you all for joining for this. So I will start with Jen, then we'll go Meredith, Dana, Penny. Jen, take it away.
Okay, hi everyone. Hi Danielle, thank you so much for being here today. I can't wait to hear about your space. So I own Day House Co-working. We are in the Chicago suburbs. We opened about a year ago. March of 2019 was when we opened, and we have 6,000 square feet, mix of private offices, open space, kids program. We don't do childcare, but we offer kids classes on school days off, which right now that's on hold. So, but we are in a very white suburb, and one of our core values is supporting the works of not only women, but also those in historically marginalized, those of historically marginalized identities. So I have been really interested in just learning about how we can be the best allies we can be and how we can use our considerable privilege to further the cause. So thanks for being here. Oh, Tony, you're muted. Or maybe.
Thank you, Jen, and onward to Meredith.
Hi, Danielle. Great to meet you. Thanks for coming today. My name is Meredith Moore. I'm the community manager of a space called Base 110 in Lexington, Kentucky. I'm actually originally from Montgomery, so hello, Alabama. But yeah, so we have 22,000 square feet in the heart of downtown Lexington, and we're a mix of co-work, office, and event space. And we are slowly delayed, but opening up another additional space here in Lexington as well. I'm looking forward to having this conversation and learning more. I've been on a path of just trying to educate myself. So I really appreciate anything that you're willing to share and teach us today. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Meredith, and on to Dana.
Hi everyone, my name is Dana. I'm from Rochester, New York. Still fairly new to the whole co-working community. I do not currently have a space open. Learning about co-working and hoping to open a physical location within the next year. So currently right now I'm focused on building community and taking a course actually to learn how to create an online membership, because I've decided that maybe that's the way for me to start right now while everybody is quarantined and not meeting in person in most areas. I know some cities have opened back up, but where I am, that's not the case. So excited to be here, and Danielle, really excited to hear what you have to share today, and appreciate you being here.
Thank you for that, Dana. And finally, Penny, welcome.
Hi, Danielle. Thanks for being here today. I live in Erie, Pennsylvania. I have a co-working space in the suburbs. It's called Thrive Therapy Space, and we launched in last September. We have only about 2,500 square feet, and it's a co-working space specifically for psychotherapists. So we didn't really have to close. We closed and people went to virtual therapy and stopped seeing clients here, but now some people are back to seeing clients here. Thanks for being here.
Damn it. Thank you, Penny. And so you got a little bit of the lay of the land now, Daniela, who's in the room. Welcome. Again, thank you again for taking the time. And so tell us about yourself. Tell us a little bit about your story and how you ended up in the position you're in now, where you're dedicating your energy towards building a shared physical space, and the importance of that in the context of the place that you're in.
Absolutely. Well, can you guys hear me well?
I can hear you just fine, thanks.
Okay. So thank you, Tony, for responding so quickly. You know, in the middle of all of everything happening from a political standpoint as well in Birmingham. So just and I saw your email and I said, let me send Tony an email to just let him know that, you know, if there needs to be a conversation, I'm more than willing to help with that, because now's the time for love and understanding. And that's just what it's about. That's the end goal. But as far as myself, I'm from Washington, D.C. I'm a licensed attorney in the state of Alabama. That's actually how I got to Alabama. And while I was finishing law school, before I went to study for the bar, I had the opportunity to clerk for a judge. And the judge that I clerked for was Helen Shores Lee. Now, Helen Shores Lee is the daughter of Arthur Shores, and Arthur Shores was Martin Luther King's attorney. And when I joined her office, and I don't know if you guys know anything about the relationship between a judge and their clerk, but basically I was her assistant. So she told me in 20 years I can write a book about all the craziness that happened in the court. But long story short, as she got older, I actually have a children's party planning business, and I was looking for some space, and I called her husband to find out if they had anything. And he said, well, why don't you just buy this building? And I was like, what are you talking about? What building? And it was a 14,000 square foot building that was the Arthur Shores Law Center. And initially when he made the offer, I thought it was just a 1,200 square foot space with law offices. I had no idea it was an entire block. And when I toured the space, I walked in it and I called my mentor and I said, you have to come here now. And he toured the space with me. I was so ignorant at the time when I was looking at the space. I had no idea that it was in a national monument. I had no idea that I really didn't know who her dad was. I knew, but I didn't know the significance of him and the building name. And I didn't know the significance of the location. So just to kind of give you guys a visual, if you remember any of the images from the 1960s with children, the children's protest and the children's march, with the dog hoses and with the dogs and the hoses, that all took place on the front side of the building that I own. That is the co-working space. So yeah, Tony, that's just, I'm a captain in the Air Force. So let me put out a disclaimer. I'm not speaking on behalf of the United States military. I've had to say that all morning for every call that I've been on. But yeah, I'm here. You guys can ask me, whatever you want. I know, Tony, I feel like I'm rambling now, so you might want to stop me.
No, you're doing great, Danielle. And I'm thinking like we could, I want to hear you talk so much more about so many things. Let me ask you, this is so indulgent and off topic, and I can't believe we haven't talked about this before, but as a captain in the Air Force, do you fly airplanes? Have you flown, are you a pilot or?
Oh, this is the crazy thing, guys. What I do, I actually am I'm a captain, so I'm an officer, but I'm a medical readiness officer. So my job in the military is to respond to pandemics and outbreaks. So So in the middle of all of this, I've been April. I don't even remember the month of March. Like I don't remember it. I just remember coming home and them saying, "Captain Hines, we need you," because we had no, we had never. It's just crazy. But yeah, that's what I do. So stateside, I support states, and I set up hospitals, I set up quarantine, I set up staging areas for medical professionals because I'm not a provider. I'm on the logistics side, so I make sure that everything from an administrative standpoint and a logistical standpoint is set up for the military, and then I bring in the providers. So you can imagine these last couple of months have been pretty crazy for me.
All right, so I want to talk to you for hours about a lot of topics, but just appreciate that, and there's so much that we can get into, and I thank you for giving me that context. And just give us just a real quick about your space. What's the status? How's it all going with that?
Okay. So one of the promises I made Judge Lee before she passed was that I would keep the building named in her father's honor. So it is still called the Office Shores Law Center. It's 14,000 square feet. I have two spaces that are 1,200 square feet that face the park side that I was just speaking about. Those are two retail spaces. And then I have about another 7,000 square feet just dedicated to lawyers. And then I have about 5,000 square feet dedicated to a co-working space. And so the actual date was supposed to have been the first week in May to open up Small Business Week. But of course, we couldn't get any of that planning done. So
Got
that's where
it.
we are.
So you're still kind of working your way towards that official opening of the whole thing, which was delayed because of everything happening, but sounds like it's going to happen. It's just a matter of navigating the pandemic and finding the right time to get everything kind of operational. Got it. Cool. And so finally, it's a big topic to kind of open up, but I'm wondering if you can comment a little bit on your perspective about what is happening, and in particular from the standpoint of local community leaders. So everybody who is in this call, most everyone who's going to watch this is either an owner or a high-level manager of a co-working space. And every co-working space is a local, physical, face-to-face, eventually it will once again be face-to-face, community space. And so those spaces are responsible for setting cultural norms for their area, for setting an example for their community, for leading by example, for all of those things. And I personally think that that these spaces can do a good job of showing people a different way of living, and different way of being. And that's why I'm passionate about this. That's why I got into co-working. I got into it because I thought the world had a bad relationship with work, and the way that people make a living, and that it was a very disempowered perspective that we work for employers that don't necessarily treat us fairly. And entrepreneurship is an empowered path, and it's one that gets us away from a lot of the gatekeeping, a lot of the discrimination, and all the other bad things that can happen in corporate culture. But in general, co-working spaces can set cultural examples for a lot of different things. And so I'm with that framing in mind. I'm curious what you think. What you think of what's going on, and what you think the opportunity is for the people who are watching this now.
So in terms of the membership base, or just in terms of
I would say in terms of themselves as individuals, in the context of the fact that they are leaders of communities. And so the role that, hey, we're all individual humans who are maybe getting a little bit, dislodged from our complacency, and realizing we do need to take this more seriously than we have been maybe, and that we're way late a lot of us are way late to the game, some of us more than others. But okay, we gotta do something. I gotta get educated. Let me get a handle on it. But also, I happen to be the head of a community that has 100 members and that reaches thousands of people in my area. So how can I maybe make better use of this in a way that's really genuine, and in a way that's long lasting? Because this time that we're in, however long it lasts, will be temporary to some degree. but the overall mission of the community spaces that we're running is going to last long beyond any particular moment or movement or particular moment in time. So yeah, that's kind of the perspective I'm thinking is first me as a person and then me as a leader.
Okay. Well, typically, if you look at history, these types of movements normally happen about every 50 years. So what's happening right now is you have a lot of the grandchildren and great grandchildren of those people that were the foot soldiers and people who marched and rallied in the 60s. Um, they're just now kind of, I don't want to use the term waking up, but it's just now there's a new light bulb that's been shining, which is why you kind of see some difference in the approach to then versus now. And so with that, I think that as co-working space owners, we have a responsibility. First of all, when people come to our locations, they want to feel space. I mean, they want to feel safe because that is their safe space for them to work. They get business done there. And so we have to facilitate environments where they feel safe. We have to facilitate inclusive environments. So one of the things that I would suggest is that you open up dialogues just like this. If you have the community programming to offer, coffee and donuts or whatever it is that you normally do, open up dialogue to where you bring those people in those communities in that are the community leaders speaking on this type of thing. Bring them in, definitely stay away from politics. And as much as you can, don't dive too much into the race thing, but really just have discussions about inclusion. And that's just one tangible thing that you can do. The other thing is to really assess those conscious and unconscious biases that we have as business owners. There's a lot of things that are embedded in us that we might not know because we haven't had that dialogue, that we probably shouldn't say or that we do. And so just really, taking some self-assessments. There's some tests online, believe it or not, that can kind of test your unconscious bias towards people. And really as retailers, we have to be sure that we watch those things, because people of other races are very sensitive to how they're perceived. Like you might not know what you're saying is offensive, but someone else might, and they won't tell you. I can't tell you how many times I've had conversations with people and they were offended by something, but they never said it to the person. And so I think right now as leaders, it's okay for us to say, I don't understand. Like, help me understand, if I think like this, why is this offensive? Or if I should have said something a different way, tell me how to say it. And I think that all community groups, we have to get out of the mindset of just being offended. Don't just be offended. If you're gonna disagree with something or something you don't like something, you need to speak up about it. But if you don't have that safe space or those people that you can go to facilitate those conversations, you're going to remain offended. And so I just think that as leaders of large spaces where we have the opportunity, we literally, as co-working space owners, we have the opportunity to gather large groups of people to talk. You can set your calendar. You don't have to wait on anybody else to set your own calendar. You don't have to wait on an event space. Set those dialogues up and make people of the community that might be offended have those dialogues. And if you are in a community where you don't necessarily have people have a I guess a rich cultural area, still have those conversations amongst yourselves. I mean, demographic that can bring expertise to a topic that might not be discussed as often as it should be. So in short, Tony, I would say the immediate thing is that in using your space, have those conversations, set up things to be culturally aware, set up things to where you assess yourself as well. So, and I know that's very broad and generic, but I mean, there are literally tools that, and I'll share those with you once we get off, if you want to, shoot them out into the group websites where you can actually take tests to kind of see if you have some unconscious bias in the way that you might even address some of your community members.
So a few things I want to highlight from what you just said. First of all, diversity and inclusion, right? You use the word inclusion, and I interviewed a woman for a podcast a while back who is a diversity inclusion consultant who helps organizations with that, and she helped me to understand the difference between the two. And I think that that distinction is actually super important, especially for co-working spaces, that you could have a diverse space and still have it not be particularly inclusive. And you could have a space that isn't even actually that diverse that's still very inclusive, right? That they're separate things. So I'm curious if you could maybe shed some light on the the distinction there and what it means to really focus on inclusion. And actually, maybe say that first because I have like three other things that I want to build on for what you said, and then we'll go from there.
Okay, okay. So I'll give you an example. I'll use Alabama as an example, with me not being from here, but being from another place and being here. I am an African American woman. Both of Do not ask me, Tony, how I'm this light skinned. Black people, we come in all shades. That's the family mystery. We've taken tests, don't worry. But Black people, we come in all shades, all sizes. And it there are many times where I'm invited, right? So I'm included, but I don't feel welcomed. And then there's other times where I'm invited and I feel welcomed at the same time. Meaning there's no conversation that's taking place that I can't be a part of. There's nothing that anyone needs to guard themselves around me by saying, in case they feel that I would be offended. And so it's one thing to be, but then you have some places, like you said, that are complete. Like there might be co-working spaces that are completely that don't have any diversity. But if someone from another, I guess, ethnic origin comes there, they'll feel at home. So I think that we have to be sure, and you have to be careful with using the word diversity, because sometimes using the word diversity makes people think that you intentionally are noticing that they're there. You know what I mean? Like, I can't tell you how many times I've sat in military meetings and they're like, "Oh, we're very diverse. Look at Danielle sitting right there." Like, I mean, come on. So I just think that we have to be aware again of those unconscious biases, and I think that's really where it comes from, in terms of being able to. You can't just say you're diverse. You can be diverse by numbers. Numbers more so will show diversity, but inclusion isn't anything you can measure. To me, inclusion is a feeling. So.
Appreciate that, Danielle. And so, and if we need to build on that more, we can talk about it more in the Q&A, or obviously you can, research diversity versus inclusion. But you also brought up the topic of holding space for difficult conversations. And I know Priya Parker talks a lot about this, author of The Art of Gathering, where she talks about one of the reasons that people feel disconnected is that we avoid hard conversations. And in so doing, we perpetuate a lot of the issues that are happening because everyone's just kind of keeping their thoughts to themselves and not learning through dialogue. And man, I can say, as a former co-working space owner, I really feel hesitant to invite a difficult conversation into my space because I feel concerned it is going to get out of control way too fast. But I also know that it's important for us to try to model this in terms of a better civic commons. And so, could I invite a conversation where we say, look, we're going to talk about difficult topics, but we're going to do it in a way where everybody in the room is committed to learning and growing together. So we're going to try to foster an environment where we all agree that we're here to learn. We all agree that we're committed to growing. We all agree we're going to avoid passing judgment on other people and those kinds of things because we're all here to try to grow together. And so we'll try to set that container. But I also know that can be extremely difficult to actually do well. So do you have any thoughts about, like, if somebody in this call is thinking about doing that, but they're feeling apprehensive, just how to approach it in the best possible way?
Yes. Okay. So, and I'm guys, I'm very blunt. So, in every community, there are organizations that cater towards African Americans. what I would do, and a lot of them are nonprofit, what I would do is I would approach those nonprofits or those community organizations and tell them just what you said, Tony. I would tell them, I have a co-working space. Um, you can use the word diversity and inclusion with them, so they'll understand exactly where you're coming from. But let them know I want my space not only to be diverse, but to be inclusive. And I want that feeling to be there. Do you have anyone in your organization? Hold on. Do you have anyone in your organization that's willing to come and facilitate that conversation? Because the last thing you want to do is to have a conversation amongst people whose perspective is all the same. Because that wouldn't get you anywhere. That would just be you spinning your wheels. So you have to bring somebody in there that's a little bit, I don't want to say against the grain, but their perspective is just a little bit more wider. So I know in Birmingham, we have several organizations like that. I know you guys are all in different cities and states. And if you want to send me a message, I can definitely reach out to the organizations here and see who their counterparts are close to you. But reach out to those area organizers, those people in your communities. I know there's protests happening all across the country, and there are peaceful protests. Now, I'm not talking about, there's two groups, going on here. And I'm sorry, can you guys hear that?
You would think Apple would have figured that part out by now, but
We'll probably call back like 6 times. But long story short, Tony, you have to reach out. You have to get a little bit out of your comfort zone. As leaders and entrepreneurs, that's part of what we're charged to do. We're different. We're different. We are the people that go against the grain. We're those people that have quit our 9 to 5. So we're going to have to get a little bit money. We're going to have to reach out and get uncomfortable and say, hey, I need this for my space.
yeah.
Because I want people to come to my space because they feel, and again, it's not a race thing. I mean, if you really think about it, it's more than just black and white. It is, you have all types of people, no matter where they're from, that have unconscious bias of other groups. And so just begin to bring all of those conversations in, because at the end of the day, when we all do business, everyone that's inside of those co-working spaces, when we do business, our customer base is very broad. We're dealing with Black, we're dealing with white, we're dealing with old, we're dealing with a lot of people. And so that education for those entrepreneurs is going to be extremely valuable. And it's going to build a level of trust with you from their perspective, because they know that if there is something that is needed and you're willing to say, hey, we're going to have these conversations, that to me as a business owner, if I was in a co-working space and my co-working CEO has decided to have these uncomfortable conversations, I would have a lot of respect for them, because they're doing something. Because you have to think, a lot of your members, if they don't have physical locations, they can't do much. They can maybe come to you and ask you, can they have some type of conversation there? But I think, Tony, you hit the nail on the head when you said, as leaders, we're leaders as co-working entrepreneurs and co-working space owners. So again, it's a very simple thing. Like, I wish I could just give you like this 10-point list of things to do to check off, but I can't, because if that was the case, we would have already checked off all those boxes and went down that list. This all begins with dialogue and with conversations and just saying, I don't understand, or I don't know.
Yeah, well, and I think it's really important, and I think there's a degree of bravery involved in saying, I'm afraid because I feel like I might get exposed for being ignorant, or I might even be called a racist for something that I didn't even realize I was doing. But one of the things I've been learning and what I've been reading is that this notion of racism is it's on a continuum. And one of the issues is that we kind of demonize the word racist to mean like fascist, Nazi, like worst person ever. And then we want to like avoid ever being potentially labeled that way, or even like exposing ourselves to the possibility, when it turns out like, well, it's not black and white in terms of whether you're like an awful super racist or not. It's a continuum. And if we acknowledge where we're at on the continuum and want to learn better how to move on that continuum, then we can all get better. But we have to be willing to expose ourselves to that a little bit. And what I'm hearing you say is, look, you don't have to be the best at this. We can kind of expect that a lot of people, especially right now, are pretty ignorant to the history of everything that's been happening. But if you demonstrate, hey, I'm brave enough to try, I'm going to show where I'm at, and I'm willing to take my licks if somebody wants to show me how to do it better, that's going to do a heck of a lot more than trying to hide from it altogether, especially now. But to the other point about it not just being black and white, I think is so important that, and I think this everything that happened with the police the last week or so has shown this, that these issues aren't about one race's problems with one, with law enforcement or something. And maybe this is our way to learn about what inclusiveness means across the board. And to your point, demonstrating that inclusiveness just through a little bit of education can go really far. So, for example, with people who deal with disabilities, the whole accessibility community is a whole world of people, and signaling that you have gotten a little bit educated and have prepared your website and some of your materials to be more accessible is just good business, because there's not only a substantial number of people dealing with disabilities, but there's a whole lot more people who are family members of people with disabilities. And so if I'm somebody who maybe doesn't have a disability but who has a loved one who does, if I see your messaging, your website accounts for the needs of people who are disabled, I, who empathize with the needs of those people, will see, hey, you've really put in some work to think about the needs of everybody. And that goes far, even for the people who don't have disabilities, to value that. So I'm grateful for that as well. All
Tony,
right.
is this helpful?
Oh my God, incredibly.
Okay.
It is for me. I'm seeing some nods. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. No, it's this. These are topics. Everything that you have talked about is something that I think hits on a topic that is on a lot of people's minds, and gives people tools to be able to be less afraid to explore things further and speak in an informed way with their community members, which is largely what I'm doing this for. So, yeah, absolutely.
I have a question. So you mentioned the feeling of having an inclusive space. It's a feeling. It's this. You actually do feel welcome. How do I gauge that, not knowing the perspective? Do you have any recommendations there?
Yeah. So studies have shown that people who are part of adversely affected groups, they do well with one-on-one communication. So I would say, are you the manager of your space right now?
Yes, I'm the community manager. Yep.
Okay. You can send out surveys, but surveys aren't going to get you the real responses that you need. They're going to give you a very high-level view of the culture inside of your organization. So I would say, if you really want to gauge it, have those conversations with those members that you feel, open it up and have those conversations. There's no way you're going to be able to measure this on some type of mathematical scale to figure it out. It's a comfort thing. But you will be able to tell, let's just say you do measure in some way your numbers of minorities or numbers of people who are historically disenfranchised groups. Like, you'll notice the decline if you do or don't have them. But I would say those personal conversations and building those relationships, because here's one thing about, and again, I'm speaking from the African American perspective. One thing about African Americans is we talk to each other a lot. So again, how I said someone might have a bad experience, you probably will never know it. And when you send out that survey, they will probably never say that. But those conversations amongst each other are happening, and you have to make yourself a part of that conversation. But the only way to make yourself a part of that conversation is if you reach out to that person and say, hey, let's go have lunch, or, let's go take, I need to get some steps in today. Let's go take a quick 30-minute walk and talk to those people and build that relationship. Because what happens is when you build relationships with people of adversely affected groups, that person then takes that information back to someone else inside that group and says, hey, well, she actually took me out and, we had lunch and we had a really good conversation. And, she feels this way because she didn't understand this, or she said this because she didn't know this. So it's going to be a different approach than that just catch all, let me send an email, let me send a survey to gauge this. You're not going to be able to gauge it that way. The only way you're going to be able to gauge it is if you pull someone from those community groups and have a discussion, because they're going to be your barometer for really what's going on.
And I feel like that's so valuable as a general principle across many different cultural challenges in your space, and or trying to get a perspective of the needs of different members of your community. And that person that you ask for their perspective, they might tell you, they might have some harsh critique. There might be some well-founded reasons why you're not doing a good job at this thing. But if you practice not getting too defensive, listening to what they have to say, and saying, hey, thank you for this. You might not agree even with what they're saying, but if you just receive it and you say, okay, I'm hearing what you're saying, maybe you ask some genuine questions to try to understand better. And if that person comes away from that saying, all right, well, I think this person's not doing the best job, but they listened to me, they seemed genuinely interested in my opinion, they didn't seem to just be pandering for my approval or something like that, then that's setting you on the right course. In general, right? Cool.
Yeah. And Tony, and this is a mindset shift, because now, especially with technology and the ability to send stuff quickly to so many people at once, let me send this and let me get a quick response. Like, this is not something that you should want to microwave. This is something that's in that slow roaster. I'm serious. This is something that's in that slow roaster, and you're gonna have to work at it if you really want to be that inclusive and diverse community, and that inclusion is felt. This is not going to be something that, like I said, you can send out a MailChimp survey. I mean, not it's a MailChimp survey monkey, and just say, hey, what do you guys think? Are we diverse? Do you feel supported? You're not going to be able to gauge it based on that. You're going to have to dig deep and really get hands-on with your member base. But this is the thing: those members that your members become your advocates. That's the best way that I can put it. And if you build those relationships with them, even if something does happen, or even if there is an opposing opinion, now you have this advocate that can say, wait a minute, she or he doesn't think like that. Like, that's not what my experience was. Here was my experience. So.
Love that. Have we got some more questions from anybody in the group who hasn't spoken up yet, or even if you have? I've got a bunch more. All right, while you think about it and get yourselves ready, because I've got this one, and then I really want to make space for anybody here to ask whatever they want to ask. I remembered the thing I wanted to talk about earlier, which is if you're reaching out to people, let's say I'm a white person, I'm reaching out to somebody of color right now, especially now. I know I've read a lot of things online, people saying, essentially to tread carefully, because this can be a difficult time for a lot of people of color, especially. We've already dealt with a lot. It's very easy to come off as seeming kind of pandering to be reaching out to someone now if you haven't already got a good relationship with them up to this point. And to ask for someone to offer their time and their energy, as you have done for us today, Danielle, is a modicum of emotional labor that a lot of people of color have already done a lot of already. And so it can be very difficult for someone to ask for that, and for someone to respond to that. And so one of the things that I'm curious about is how best to approach somebody with all of that in mind. And in my mind, I assume that comes down to saying, well, first of all, I'm not going to not do it just because I'm afraid. So I'm going to find a way to do it well, but let me find a way to approach this in a way that demonstrates respect. So could I reach out to someone and say, hey, look, I want to let you know, I'm assuming that I don't assume that you have availability for this, but I want to try to figure out how best to do this. I want to do it in a way that's respectful. If you'd be willing to show me who'd be willing to help me with this, then I would love to have that conversation. Something that really kind of invites their perspective on how best to engage you. And then if they say like, hey, look, I'll be happy to come talk to your thing, but I'd like to get paid. Or I can't do it, but I know someone who'd be willing to, or something like that, where you're kind of creating dialogue around how the engagement could work. Does that sound like kind of a good direction? I feel like I totally fumbled through that, but there's
So
like,
Tony,
yeah.
that was my question, but you said it better than I could. I wasn't exactly sure how to say it, but that's good.
All right. What do you think, Danielle?
Well, okay, so there's a couple things that you can couple ways you can approach this. Number one, right now we're in the middle of COVID, right? So you don't have to find somebody that's just in your city where you are. You know, you can reach out to somebody. You know, again, like I said, I can think of several people right now that I can get you in touch with that will say, yes, I'll do something for free. Because here's the heart of the issue for the people who really care. For African Americans who really have a heart for this entire, just the race dynamics and the tension to ease, they're willing to have those conversations. And a lot of the feelings and the hurt and the emotion for African Americans comes from the feeling of lack of acceptance, the lack of equality, and the inability to feel like we're being heard. And so I would say first off, that it's a two-pronged approach. Definitely have those conversations within your community, but then also as co-working space owners and leaders and entrepreneurs, sit down with those people that are close to you, or maybe people that you know of, and say, hey, I would send a very simple message, maybe a phone call. Listen, right now, I really want to get a good understanding of everything that's happening, and I want to know how I can help. Simple as that. Because when you tell someone you want to understand and that you need help, right then, people want to feel needed. And that right there, you have created value for that person to then respond to you and to then help you with, with that conversation. I can definitely we can maybe, Tony, I'll talk to you offline about some folks that I can get you in touch with, that if you want to share with your community, that they'll be more than happy to talk to everyone. Maybe over a Zoom call. I hate to say it, but the fact that we're in COVID, everybody's on Zoom calls. So it's nothing for somebody to be, in Alaska and you're in Florida having a workshop. But yeah, you just have to be very careful about right now. Everyone right now has to be vulnerable. You have to be vulnerable to say, I don't understand. Because if you think that you do, that's when you get into that dangerous territory of maybe becoming offended. But if you just approach everything from the idea and the perspective that you're really just trying to learn, I think that you'll get some really valuable information and feedback from not only your community members, but the people that you do decide to allow to come talk to you. You have to approach it with an open mind.
Gotcha. That's really great. I think that attitude, that language is useful in a lot of contexts, but especially in this one. Cool. Anybody else have a question, or I would even say, if we want to soften this a bit, like a topic or a subject area that you're curious about or that you're finding interesting in this particular climate in this moment?
I don't know. I guess I'm interested in moving forward, what really we should be doing differently. I mean, in addition to, what we're talking about today, diversity and inclusion and opening our own minds, learning more, that's all so important. But then, just kind of structurally, what's going to need to change. So I get that this is an important part of it, and kind of opening our minds is so important. But then structurally, what's going to need to change, and whatever. I'm a therapist. I was talking to a client recently. Anyway, just gave me an example. An African American client just gave me an example about, I don't know, just the insidiousness of people not seeing. She works for one of the agencies in town, and they do a whole bunch of diversity inclusion, and apparently even talk about cultural differences between different groups that we might be working with, including African Americans. But then she and others get called to task for being too loud, even though they've had discussions that maybe culturally African Americans, I don't know, get closer to people, or they might be a little bit more expressive or whatever, right? And so then she's not getting a promotion, or she's being called to task for the very things that they've been training on. So that's, I don't know, that it kind of blows my mind. I don't know what we do about that. I mean, I'm glad they're training on that stuff, but then if they're not paying any attention at all to what they're training on, then I don't know, I guess I'm feeling a little discouraged about training. How about we go train everybody? Well, I don't know. Is that really going to work? What else needs to happen besides training people?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and right now with this current climate, there's a lot going on, but they're all in their separate silos, right? So you have what's happening with the police brutality. Okay. Now that's spilling over, and it's headed into what's happening with race relations. You know, because it wasn't necessarily that the police brutality was a black or white issue. It was more so. It's more so police. If you call a police officer, and here's the main issue, and then I'll break that down some more. The issue is if you are supposed to feel like a police officer is there for your safety, but you feel like you can't call them to help keep you safe, then what do you do? You know, and that is the main the issue. You know, I don't want to get political at all because I don't think it's a political issue. Personally, I think that it's a moral and it's a spiritual issue when you start talking about how people treat one another. But I mean, you're right in terms of, and that organization that you just talked about, it seems like you might have a good end with them for them to be able to come and help you inside your space. I don't know. But if they teach those types of classes, that's definitely a good way to start that dialogue. I forgot what I was going to say to you just now. I'll remember in a second.
I'll add something, Danielle, and maybe then you could pick back up around kind of the what to do next question, Penny. And I think there's twofold for me. One is revisiting and tapping into your purpose and why you built and why you're doing what you're doing. I think that some people get into co-working because they see a market opportunity, but most everyone who's in this group does it because they want something to be better than what it was. And if we can connect with that, and really every co-working space owner needs to do a little personal retreat at least once or twice a year and revisit why they're doing it, because otherwise they're going to forget and they're going to quit eventually, right? And so if you revisit why you got into this, what is it about the world that you want to work differently than the world that you grew up in? That is a wellspring of motivation from which you can enact all kinds of action for the rest of your life, right? And so there's always good work to be done in that direction. And I would say that secondly, part of what this conversation is about is talking about the situation, but I think to some degree it's also about modeling and just living in that better world. So Peter Block in his book Community talks about the stuck community versus, I forget, he has these different kinds of communities, but basically communities that focus on struggle perpetuate the struggle by focusing on the struggle. And you have entire organizations, nonprofits, that their whole purpose for existence is to fight a negative force, and they fight against that negative force, but they also need that negative force in order to justify their existence. And so it's reinforcing the problem to some degree, right? Whereas if we say, let us model the better world we want to see, let us simply live it, let's do it in the best way that we can, then we're actually making the better world exist. And so if you can envision a world in which your increasingly diverse, your increasingly inclusive community is maybe partnering with other communities to have like some really awesome socially distanced, picnics. And and that picnic, at that picnic, you are not discussing the heavy issues of race and diversity and police and all of this stuff, but you're actually just people who are having a really nice time and making good memories together. Um, you're doing it. And that I think we could use some of that easefulness given everything else that's going on. So that's kind of a perspective I have on it too.
I remember why I was going down the rabbit hole of silos. So let me get back to what you is it Peggy?
Penny.
Penny. So, Penny, you asked for next steps. And the reason why I was talking about silos is because right now there's so much. And like Tony said, this is now the time to go back and look at your business plan, look at your mission, look at your executive summary, your core values. If you don't have core values, maybe now is the time that you can establish those. But there's so many issues right now, and there's, like I said, there's so many silos of things. But right now, I would say the best approach is not a broad approach. The best approach is to focus on, hey, what can I do in the space that I'm in? And you might not be in a position to do anything about police brutality. You can, maybe as an individual, you can support it, but a solution for a co-working space owner right now for dealing with police brutality might not be the lane that you should be in. Your lane might need to be diversity and inclusion inside of your workspace. Because here's the reality. Again, we're in the middle of COVID. So really what's about to happen, and Tony, you can attest to this, I think we're going to see a huge shift in workforce. And I think that people are going to begin to work more from home. And I think that as people begin to work more from home, I think they're going to want to get out of the house more often. And as a result, you might have those occasional or part-time memberships. So if I am, Michael down the street and I want to get out of the house, but I'm an African American, I might be looking for something that offers a small part-time space that, even though I'm only there maybe 4 or 5 hours a week just to get out of the house, I still want to feel included. And so you're still helping the broad picture because you're helping Michael over here inside of that one silo, which is diversity and inclusion. Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, that does make sense. That's helpful. And it kind of resonates with a different client who works at the local university and has been talking about this a lot. He was talking about pretty much what you're saying, that we should all find our own way. Like what unique kind of qualities and characteristics do I have that I can move into? And, as I'm sitting here, I'm all about helping people be less judgmental. All of this comes back to so much judgment, and, whether we're judging African Americans or any kind of group, and it comes back to, I think, almost like an internal and intrinsic and almost even primitive way that we have of wanting to feel superior and wanting to have another group to be inferior, right? And so, I don't know, that's, I think, an important focus for me.
Those implicit attitudes and those subconscious thoughts we don't know are there. And even if you don't have a co-working space, but you know that you might be around people who might have attitudes that aren't very inclusive, maybe your silo that you're in with them is having those conversations yourself, because maybe they're not interested in going to a workshop about diversity. So you really there's so much and it's so broad, but you have to figure out, what is your lane in all of this? How can, if 50 people make a small contribution, it makes a beautiful picture, and everybody just has to do their part. I'm not in politics, neither are you. So we probably, and Tony, maybe you are. Maybe you can do more with police brutality, situation going on than we can with changing attitudes within our local community. And that's where it starts. It starts with these smaller conversations people are having at home. It starts with the person, going to the coffee bar inside the co-working space and talking to another coworker member. So everything starts small, but you have to start where you are. Don't feel like you have to take on this huge issue and that you have to go out and protest, because that's not what, at the end of the day, after the protest, my question to a lot of my Black friends is, then now what? Now what? Like, what is going to happen now? Like, tangibly, what are you going to do? What is your next step other than marching? Because that's one piece of the puzzle. Now let's get into diversity and inclusion. Let's get into race relations. So.
Thank you, Danielle, for your compassionate response and all of the time you've shared. I'm remembering that in my own experience running a space, that stepping up and trying to be a leader is difficult. It means you are exposing yourself to criticism, and look, there, even regardless of all of that, there's power struggles, there's competitors, there's all kinds of dynamics out there, and it's a heck of a lot easier. Well, I say easier. You're less likely to encounter that if you just hide and you don't try to speak up and you don't try to do anything. Um, but that's not how the people in this room are wired. And as much as it sucks and as much as it may make us question the work that we do when we do encounter these difficult situations, it's the price that we pay for the opportunity to change the world and make it a better place, even in a small way. And at the end of the day, I think all of us will rest better knowing that even if we had to suffer as a result of our work, if we've done our best to try to make things better in the way that we wish to see it, then it's worth it. And we build a thicker skin as we go, I hope.
Absolutely.
But that's only with practice, and it's only with the support of each other. So, if anybody here wants to talk to me more, I'm available. And especially during this time, there's a lot of awkward conversations that have to be had, a lot of difficult conversations. So, I want to do what I can to support anybody who wants to do better. And I want to thank Danielle again for taking the time to join us.
Absolutely. And I hope this was helpful, you guys. And I apologize to you all. So I get Tony's emails, but I normally have so many things going on that I've only joined the call maybe twice. So I'm going to make it a point to be more intentional about joining the calls and really engaging with you guys. So I'm always an open book. You can call me as blunt as they come. I'm not going to say too much since I don't know if Tony's going to release this video. But thank you, Tony. I really appreciate the opportunity to do this. And guys, just be brave. You are brave enough to step out there and get into an industry. How old is co-working, Tony? Is it less than?
It was started in 2005. The word as we know it today.
So you're in an industry that's not even 20 years old. You've stepped out there. You've made financial investments. You've made personal investments. You've made sacrifices with your time and your emotions. You got it. You got this. Just be intentional, be vulnerable, and know that when you don't understand something, you don't understand something. But at the same time, stand for what you believe in. If you're making those decisions, it's your business. It's your business. And that person will be called out eventually. Because now that person, everyone knows how that person feels. So don't be afraid is my point.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you for your help. You mentioned coming to future calls, and this is a call for people who are building spaces to help each other. So my hope is that the next time you join, you can tell us what you're working on and see if we can help point you in the right direction so you can continue the work you're doing to build a really terrific, amazing space to carry on that historic legacy. And let's keep the conversations going together.
All right, and you guys have an open invitation to Birmingham. If you do get a chance to come to Birmingham and check out my space, I'm right across the street from the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute and the church where the 4 little girls where the church bombing happened. So if you ever decide to come to Birmingham, just let me know. Tony has an open invitation, so he'll be here hopefully when I open, like the grand opening. We'll get you here.
I've been looking for a road trip to take. Thank you so much, Danielle. Again, thanks to all of you for taking the time to join this conversation. Keep doing the great work you're doing. Keep in touch. Keep talking. Talk to each other. Talk to me. And let's pick up again next week. All right. Thanks, everyone. Take care.